several writers have said that a reformed and revitalized World Trade Organization ought to be able to move us further towards the monitoring I mentioned a moment ago. Some would be more specific and argue that for this to work effectively, there needs also to be some regulation of capital flow and exchange mechanisms. And this is where a variety of commentators from very diverse backgrounds see the Tobin tax proposals as having a place, taxing currency exchanges in ways that would serve national economies. We should also need some mechanisms by which it could be guaranteed that a recognisable proportion of savings, locally generated profits in a national economy, could be ploughed back into investment in local infrastructure, so that we shouldn't constantly have to deal with the consequences of new money in a growing economy roaming around looking for a home and ending up fueling the pressure on banks to lend above their capacity so as to keep the money moving. Well, most such moves would, of course, require a formidable, perhaps unattainable level of global agreement and global enforceability. Short of this, they could be counterproductive. But the debate on what kinds of international convergence are possible and necessary is a crucial one. The basic question that Skidelsky and others are posing is how the market as we know it can be restructured so as to make it do what it's supposed to do. That is, to offer producers the chance of a fair and competitive context in which to trade what they produce and to become in turn effective investors and developers of the potential of their business and their society. The last few months have seen an extraordinary and quite unpredictable shift in the balance, with international financial transactions losing credibility and national governments coming into their own as guarantors of some level of stability. It's a very ironic mutation of the idea of the market state. When it comes to the crunch, the credit crunch, populations want governments to secure their basic spending power, even if it limits their absolute consumer freedoms. There's also a point which was underlined recently in the debate in the Church of England's General Synod on this subject, about securing justice for future generations. Any morally and practically credible policy should be looking to guarantee that future generations don't inherit liabilities that will cripple the provision of basic social care, for example. Unregulated freedom in the climate of destructive speculation is not the most attractive prospect, certainly not compared with a guarantee that assets won't be allowed to drop indefinitely in value. In that climate, the only way of maximising choice is to make sure that it is still possible to choose and to use something, and to secure the possibilities of reasonable choice for our children and grandchildren, even at the price of restricting some of our options now. Without that restriction, nothing is solid. We should face a world in which everything flows, melts, dissolves, in a world of constantly shifting and spectral valuations. Now, if we try to draw some of this together into a few governing principles, what might emerge? The non-economist, myself, is bound to be intimidated by the complexity of what we confront. But, as it's been said, we are all economists now. The specialists are not more conspicuously successful than others in mapping the territory, and this at least encourages some tentative proposals from the sidelines, however broad and aspirational. Certainly over the last century and a half, Anglican theologians have from time to time taken their courage in their hands and attempted to outline what an ethically responsible economy might look like. And I'm conscious of standing in the shadow of some very substantial commentators indeed, from F.D. Morris to William Temple. In the background, too, is the formidable legacy of Roman Catholic social teaching, expressed in some powerful statements from the British and American bishops' conferences in recent decades. So, with this heritage in mind, I shall suggest 5 elements in descending order of significance that might provide the bare bones of an economic culture capable of delivering something like an ethically defensible global policy. First, then, and most fundamentally, we need to move away from a model of economics which simply assumes that it is essentially about the mechanics of generating money, and try to restore an acknowledgement of the role of trust as something which needs time to develop. And so also to move away from an idea of wealth or profit, which imagines they can be achieved without risk, and to return to the primitive capitalist idea, as sketched above, of risk sharing as an essential element in the equitable securing of wealth for all. Second, as many writers, from Pater Dasgupta to Jonathan Porritt, have argued, environmental cost has to be factored into economic calculations as a genuine cost in opportunity, resource, and durability, and thus a cost in terms of doing justice to future generations. There needs to be a robust rebuttal of any idea that environmental concerns are somehow a side issue or even a luxury in a time of economic pressure. The questions are inseparably connected. Third, we need to think harder about the role, actual and potential, of democratically accountable governments in the monitoring and regulation of currency exchange and capital flow. This could involve some international conventions about wages and working conditions, cooperation between states to try and prevent the indefinite growth of what we might call, on the analogy of tax havens, cheap labour havens. Likewise, it might mean considering the kind of capital controls that prevent a situation where it's advantageous to allow indefinitely large sums of capital out of a country. Fourthly, the existing international instruments, the IMF and World Bank, the World Trade Organization and the G8 and G20 countries, need to be reconceived as both monitors of the global flow of capital and agencies to stimulate local enterprise and provide some safety nets, as long as the global playing field is so very far from being level. They need to provide some protective sanctions for the disadvantaged, not aimed at undermining market mechanisms, but at letting them work as they should, working to allow countries to trade their way out of destitution. And fifthly, necessary short-term policies to kick-start an economy in crisis, the sort of policies we've seen in the UK in recent months, should be balanced by long-term consideration of the levels of material and service production that will provide an anchor of stability against the possible storms of speculative financial practice. This is not simply about bailing out firms under pressure, but about a comprehensive look at national economies with a view to understanding what sort of production levels would act as ballast in times of crisis and investing accordingly.